The first new concept in this section is overloading. The idea that you can have more than one method or more than one constructor with the same name. But if you have more than one method or constructor with the same name, how is Java going to know which one you mean? And the answer is by looking at the argument list. So if you have more than one method or more than one constructor that has exactly the same name, their argument list, their argument signature, has to be different. You have to either have a different number of arguments, or if the methods or constructors have the same number of arguments, they have to have different types of arguments. Here's an example. So here's a class that has two methods called randomNum. But one of the methods takes 0 arguments, and one of the methods takes 1 argument. So in any code that calls randomNum, Java knows at compile time which one you mean by looking at the argument signature. Again, you can also have overloading where two methods or constructors have the same number of arguments, but the arguments differ in type. Okay, so why is this useful? Well, overloading methods is useful when you have two methods that do substantially the same task. It would be confusing if you had two methods that summed up an array, and you called one of them, say, array sum of integers, and the other one array sum of doubles. It makes more sense to just call them array sum, but declare one to take an array of ints as an argument, and the other to declare as taking an array of doubles as an argument. Similarly, the logarithm. You can imagine that you assume that the base is e, so if you pass in only a single number, it computes log base e. But if you pass in two numbers, the second number is considered the base. It probably wouldn't make sense to call those two different method names. It would be confusing to the other users of your code, so you use the same name. With constructors, the idea of having two constructors with the same name is if you have different ways of building instances. So for example, suppose that for ships, you say there's never a reasonable default for the name of a ship. But there are reasonable defaults for the position and speed of a ship. So sometimes you provide just the name, and sometimes you provide all 5 parameters. Okay, let's look at overloading in our ongoing ship simulation example. We can now define two constructors. The first takes 4 numbers and a string, and the second constructor takes only a string. So you can call new either way. Now again, remember from the previous lecture that once you define your own constructor or constructors, the default constructor, the 0 argument constructor, goes away. So now there are two ways to build ships. Supply 4 numbers in a string, or supply a string, but there's no other way. I also now have two versions of move. And the idea is, in my simulation system, maybe for a long time the ships just sail on and nothing interesting is happening, but once in a while they get near each other and interesting things go on. And so if I just call move as before, it moved the ship one step. But if I want it to go a long distance in the straight direction, I can say move, and I can pass in 10 or 20 or some other number of steps. Now, of course, remember that you don't want to repeat code. The main goal of object-oriented programming is avoid needing to repeat identical or nearly identical code. So it would be wrong to essentially repeat the code inside the move method. But instead, I can just have one version of move, call the other version of move. Now I have more convenient method calls that the other code can use, but I'm not repeating myself. So now when I build a ship, I can build a ship by supplying just a name, or I can build a ship by supplying 4 numbers and then a name. When I move a ship, I can call the default move, which moves it 1 step, or I can specify the number of steps that I want it to move. Again, notice that Java can resolve this naming dispute at compile time. Even though the constructor is called ship and even though the method is called move, they differ in either the number or the types of their arguments. So Java knows ahead of time at compile time which is which. So when I run this, I compile just the test routine as before. I run the test routine and I get the output similar manner as in the past.